as well as on our social pages. My name is Eric Blackburn. I'm with CoBUG here, but I'm the BIM Manager at Berardi Partners. We are a multifamily, primarily multifamily housing, both the low end with tax credit and at the high end market rate, and we're quite busy. So what I've been interested in for quite a while is the effort to try and get basically site context. And I find it ironic that Autodesk's premier modeling software for architecture has basically an almost complete lack of tools related to help place it on the site and in context beyond the property line. So I kind of came up with the slogan that in space, no one can hear you BIM. So the idea is that this building is just kind of floating in space without any kind of site to tie it to. If you're lucky and you have a civil engineer on the project, usually that's after the contract has been awarded, after the, some of the design and stuff has progressed, and it's not always readily available for schematic design or other phases. But I'm always also somewhat humored by the continual use of just perfectly flat slabs to represent parking lots or sites that obviously are not really accurate, and that there could be a lot of contour changes or grade changes in there. So today's session essentially is how to achieve some really easy effects that Enscape has added to their product line, or InfraWorks, and form it into Revit. And so kind of the first step is using Revit with Enscape's new tool for site context. And I have the sample residential file from Autodesk that's included out of the box. It's just a simple house on a sloping site. It has not been located at all. And I also have Enscape running here, so I can switch to that view and look at that. It's beautiful, okay? But it doesn't have anything beyond the site. Well, they have this tool in here that's called Site Context. But in order to set that up, you really have to go through a number of hoops. And that hoop essentially is going to the Manage tab and hitting Location. So if you say, I want to put it at Columbus, Ohio, I can hit search and I can zoom in and move the pin, and let's put it right in the middle of downtown. Maybe we want this nice green lot in the middle of Columbus here. So once you set the location for that, you simply go back to your Enscape window and hit Site Context and add site context. So the key here is setting the location in Revit, and then it pops up this little window. You can adjust the size and scale. Let's say I want some of the riverfront, or that's too big, I don't want to look at that yet. I can also rotate it to get it aligned with the street grids here. And once I have it set to where I want it, I can just hit import. You also have the ability to include buildings and landmarks, streets and sidewalks, or topography. So I click import, and it goes out through OpenStreetMaps, pulls that data, and brings it into a little view here. Okay, so now I'm right where the State House is, and you can see that there's no OpenStreetMaps site for that building. And you can have the ability after the fact to update the site context. If you basically refresh it, you can edit the site context. You have the ability to rotate it or stretch it. You have these X, Y, and Z controls, although I found that it's easier you can just kind of pan it and drag it. For the vertical, instead of typing in, it's actually the y-axis and not the z-axis. But if you hold down the control key, you can actually raise it up and down that way. So once you get it to where you would like it to be, You can confirm the changes here at the bottom by clicking that button. And now we have our beautiful house on a beautiful green lot in downtown Columbus. All right. In this instance, you don't have any control over the buildings as far as the coloring. You have the streets, essentially. You can't change really anything about that, but you do have the ability to turn on and off items and see them or not by clicking on these little arrows. So any of the buildings you can turn off. So if anything on High Street here, I can see the Huntington Bank building. We want to tear that down. So I have a nice view of the riverfront. You can tear down the Rife Center and basically clear our entire path to the river. So as a first pass, you know, it's great. It's got some information that wasn't available. It's really easy to use, but there are some drawbacks to that. So I'm going to delete this and change, go back to add site context again. And if I expand it, and I should be able to see the river in this case, it doesn't do any different shading for water features. So you can see that there's no river there. So that's kind of a downside to it. But for the aspect of easiest, fastest, Enscape gives you that ability now, really easy, really fast. But with limitations. So if you accept the limitations, it can be a useful tool. So I just wanted to share that. That's a new feature with Enscape 3.3, I think, just came out. I've made recommendations. So if you use Enscape for the kind of the in Revit rendering aspect of it, it's very good to do. It does not get added into your Revit model. It only appears here in Enscape. So something to keep in mind. But what happens if you have a different site or a different project? Well, InfraWorks is Autodesk's conceptual site design tool. And so let's say we wanted to put our nice little building out at Buckeye Lake. So the interface for that, I accidentally clicked on that, but I meant to show you the interface for the model builder function of it. So I'll go back here in just a second. All right. So in this one, since you're creating a new model, again, you have you know, a map that you can scroll into. So Buckeye Lake is out east, and let's pick something around the west end of Buckeye Lake in this area. So you select that, what Enscape, or I'm sorry, InfraWorks is asking for. You can say Buckeye Lake, and then you pick a coordinate system. And for the most cases, like Ohio 83, South Zone, US foot, so OH 83 SF, and you would click OK there. And you have the option to draw a rectangle or show the contents of the window. You can go, I think, 2 kilometers square or rectangular. And if you get too big, it will actually let you know. But in this instance, I want the whole thing, and I can zoom in a little bit more, and you would hit create model, and it would tell you that it is building the model in the cloud, and it will send you an email once that's ready. But I've gone ahead and done that already. So click on this one, and essentially what you get is a nice water representation. You get the aerial imagery, you get terrain contours, you get roads. Also from OpenStreetMaps, you get roads that you can configure. So you get a lot more information with that, and you can see the clouds and things. So it gives you different ways to do that. It's not quite as good of a rendering as Enscape, and until Enscape allows you to render within InfraWorks, that it's kind of a starting point. But for schematic design development, this is pretty good stuff. You can select roads and say, I don't really need to see that. I'll just rely on the aerial imagery. You can pick items and hide them or delete them. The resolution on the imagery right now is set to kind of level 17 of 19. And where that comes into play is under the data sources here, under this window. You can configure the imagery. And if I click on that button and right click configure, that will pop up a window here. And down at this tile level, it's saying my resolution is about 1.2 meters per pixel. So a little over 3 feet there. And you have the ability to go as far as 0.29 pixels or meters per pixel. So about a foot resolution. Now, I'm not going to click on that or change it, but you do have the ability to come up with nicer resolution imagery there. I didn't change anything here, so I can just hit OK. But you'll notice that I don't have any buildings anywhere. And so there really isn't anything added to that. So I just have the terrain and the imagery and roads and water features. But how can you add buildings? Well, you could manually trace them, but that would take a while, particularly on bigger sites. But I kind of stumbled across this in playing around with InfoWorks a little bit. And they have this little button here called Autodesk Connector for ArcGIS. So, well, I don't think I have an account. Oh, what's this button? Access as guest. Yes, let's play around with that. So it finds your location and it says, here's all the things that are available for that. Plus it gives you a ability to enter a search term. So if I type in Ohio buildings, I can come up with the Ohio Building Footprints project and an Ohio Buildings project. Well, what's the difference between those? If I click on the layers, essentially I can see that this one was created in May of 2020. If I click on this one, I can see that it was created in September of 21. So this one is newer. It seems to be backed by Microsoft Building Footprints. This one seems to be more of a personal project essentially. So I'm going to select this one. And then if I go back to the layers, it's asking me, what do I want to add to that? And I want to add buildings. And now this button down here that I've selected this and selected this, I can add this to my design project. Okay, so it goes out to ArcGIS and pulls in vector data for that site. And wait, it placed them all at a lower level, essentially. So basically it's at 0 elevation, but I haven't done anything with them yet. If I right click on this and hit configure, now I have the ability to come in and play around with some of the settings, okay? So first of all, source has this option for draping. So if I drape them on the site, that will set them all to the elevation of the terrain. I can also come in here and change some things like styles of it. Well, what it has going on is the facade is brick and it's kind of randomized. But what I like to do is come in here and just apply a color to it. I don't want pure white. I don't want something just soft gray. So I would pick that, and you'll see that it has replaced that facade style with this color, internet color. So I am going to copy that. The base color is saying random facade color, and there's a script in there that is generating random facade colors with different levels of RGB values. So I'm going to just paste that same color, that soft gray, and then the roof material is assigning a random roof color there as well. Well, I want all of my roofs to be consistent, and I want shingles. So I'm going to pick the shingles. This is saying that my roof height is 33 feet in every instance. I only want it to be 18 feet here. And roof slope, you have the ability to set everything at a 30-degree or whatever angle you want, or you can leave it blank. So I'm hitting 30 for that. I'm going through the different tabs. I've done that. The scripting, essentially, here's the colors. These are RGB values that are randomized for the facade colors. I don't want to really do that. So I'm just hitting edit and close and refresh. So I've overridden that and it'll pop up a message here. So the data source has scripts, so I can continue with that. But what it's done now, it is to take all those buildings that were below the site here and has draped them on the surface of that. It's applied a 30-degree roof pitch. It's applied, you know, a soft gray color, although it shows up as kind of brownish. And so with very little effort on my part, I now have a contextual menu with aerial imagery, terrain, roads, and buildings, and it's stylized in the way that I like, and very little effort. So, so now that I have this, I can simply do a share and share it as a FBX file. So export the 3D model. I want to use the entire model. It's got coordinate system. It's going to do basically everything, but if I wanted to, I could separate the ground and the footprints, and it will export the materials and textures. So the imagery that comes across would be the same thing. So I would hit export, and that would save a, oops, cancel this, save it to the correct spot. Let's put this on my desktop. It will say CoBUG test site. Buckeye Lake. All right, so that's creating a Buckeye Lake test site in FBX format. I hit export. It doesn't take very long. Okay, so how do I get it into Revit, essentially? Well, the key now is until the 22 versions of Revit and InfoWorks and Format, there wasn't a way that preserved all the aerial imagery and all of the materials on the buildings. And this is something that I had been pursuing for a very long time. There were export to FBX and bringing that into 3D Studio Max and trying to convert that into a different format. There was publishing to Civil 3D and trying to get that into, and none of it worked. Even taking it into in Navisworks and bringing that into Revit, but that would treat it as a coordination model. And so it wouldn't even show up in Enscape because it was thinking that it was only something for coordination. So until the 22 versions, you know, it was a very long, complicated process. It was difficult to work with, but Format now allows you to, so I started an untitled project, new project. You can go into the browser here. You can search for Buckeye Lake. And it will come over here and I can zoom out. Let's see. I can drag it to the same area that we were looking at before. Right in this area. And essentially, once I have that located, I'm only interested in setting the location. Okay, so that's all I do is I click that, and then I can do File, Import locally. I go to my desktop, and I have my CoBUG test site Buckeye Lake, and it's only an 8 megabyte file or so, 7 or 8 megabytes. So it's not that big. Used to be, you know, hundreds of megabytes, but they've really improved the process quite a bit. And now I can see that my site has been imported, all the aerial imagery, the buildings, the roads, everything is in there. And I simply need to save it. So I'll save it locally and desktop. So this is CoBUG Buckeye Lake format. Okay, so now I can go into Revit here, go back to my house, and I can do Insert, Import to CAD, and that defaults to the DWG format by default, but I had been testing something earlier. If I go to my desktop now, I've got CoBUG Buckeye Lake. Let's put this at level 1, bring that in. Categories, let's see. Scope box, section box here. All right, so there it is. And I'll switch to Enscape here. And pause the updates so I can actually move this. So it's pinned by default, so you kind of have to unpin it so you can move it around. I like to switch to a floor plan view. So let's do site and switch it to wireframe so I can see. Change my view range. It's cropped, so uncrop it. And now I can start to come in and move my building into place on this little site. And if I look at it in 3D, I can see that I need to adjust it way down. My section box not visible. And hide up. All right, so now I can grip this and extend it down and kind of see where my building needs to be. So move the site, not the section box. And there. I think I've got it where I want it. All right, so now I can resume the live view of Enscape. And switch to the Enscape window, and now I have my building on the site with context. And a couple things you notice, okay? So the aerial imagery is kind of muted, sort of. And what is going on with that, and there doesn't seem to be an easy way to govern it. So if anybody is a Dynamo expert, this would be a good item to figure out. But if I come into the materials, anything labeled material here is generally from the site rendering, the aerial imagery. And you'll notice that it's set to a glossiness of 50. So it literally entails coming in here and adjusting all these down to a glossiness of 0. So it doesn't get the reflections. And unfortunately, the bigger the site, the more materials there typically are, because it sections up the imagery into little parcels. So I'll just do a few of those for this demonstration and turn it down to 0 essentially. And that seems to help quite a bit. It still obviously is smooth. If I switch back to my Enscape window here and zoom out a little bit, you should be able to find the ones pretty easily that I adjusted. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. And I'm not seeing it, but it does help a little bit. It's not great, but you know, you can certainly navigate around here now and create your windows, your animation paths, or export your rendering views. Got the graphics turned down a little bit for this. It streams a little bit better than trying to do it in ultra high resolution. But you know, for the purposes of adding site context and you know, seeing what the view looks like from the deck here at Buckeye Lake, you can hit the space bar and you're at standing height essentially. So I kind of like that. So marketing of that is you know, a very successful tool that, you know, until the advent of this, there were some very difficult workarounds. If you happen to have somebody that uses 3D Studio Max full time, you know, you can certainly get better, faster results. A lot of people are using photogrammetry with drone footage and creating meshes from that to make basically the site context very realistic. What I really loved about Enscape is the fact that it runs within Revit. There's no export process. There's no placement of other lights and things. I can change the time of day. So if I wanted to see, you know, nighttime and the interior illumination, you know, the lights come on, I don't have to add them. You know, you get accurate stars and clouds and moon depending on the time of day and date. So it's kind of hard to rotate and find the North Star there, but it might be something fun to try at some point. So holding down the shift key and then the right key on your mouse or right button on your mouse allows you to shift the time of day. The clouds don't move unless you actually have wind set. If I show you the settings here under atmosphere, if you don't have wind intensity and change the time of day, the clouds kind of flutter, but they don't move, even though the sun does, and you get the different shadows there. So a couple things to keep in mind with that. So that's how you add sites from InfraWorks into Format and into Revit. So I had some other InfraWorks sites kind of prepared. So that was Buckeye Lake, Capitol Square, Columbus, which was the one that I mentioned. Didn't have a Capitol building. The other thing that you can do in InfraWorks that's really easy is substitute buildings. So if you're not happy with the look of what comes from OpenStreetMaps, something that you're able to do that works very well is replace the content. So you can see the Rhodes Tower here. You can see the Levesque Tower, the Huntington Tower. You can see the Hyatt on Capitol Square, I think, the Capitol building. So you're able to replace that content. So how do you do that? Well, essentially, you have the ability with this data sources button to add content by this little button here. So you can pick 3D models. These are all the different formats. You can add InfraWorks, Revit. You can add SketchUp. So in this instance, I simply added SketchUp files for these buildings. And you can go, if you have a SketchUp license, you can go to 3D Warehouse. Let me pull this window over. 3D warehouse.sketchup.com. And you can search for Columbus, Ohio. And, oh, it's empty. There's no searchers. Oh, don't forget to check on the models button. I've done that a couple of times. And then you have an option of buildings that are available. And I could say Columbus, Ohio. I could say Capitol. And here's the Capitol building. And I could download that and add that in. same thing with the other buildings. So I won't do that, but essentially that's how you do that. You have to be careful with content from SketchUp because sometimes the faces are reversed. So it's possible to get something from them and replace it and have a bunch of faces that are invisible, and so it doesn't look right. If that is the case, you can go into SketchUp and flip the faces, and in some cases you want to keep the material there but flip the face. So if you've used SketchUp in the past, you know the kind of the white and blue faces. If it's a negative face that's sticking out or a blue face that's sticking out, it won't show up and won't render here. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm going to go back to this Public Square Cleveland project. We had a project in downtown Cleveland. I kind of did the same thing with that, where I had a kind of a bigger InfoWorks site because we were doing a high-rise apartment building, and we wanted some of the iconic buildings of Cleveland. So we've got the football stadium, we've got a Key Bank building, we've got this tower here, the Terminal Tower, a couple other buildings that we wanted to feature. And so it's, like I said, it's pretty easy to replace. We've got the courthouse here, and Jacobs Field or Progressive Field. So you can come in and replace items. If you know something's going to be replaced or demolished, you can simply delete it off of there and it disappears. You can put it back by undoing. You have the same forward and backward undo. So, if this was our building and, all of a sudden you have the key landmarks kind of in the background that's rendered through the windows, it can be very convincing. And, the fact that InfoWorks gives you these water features that the Enscape OpenStreetMap stuff doesn't is pretty significant. So that's kind of a deal breaker, unless you're using it for very, very basic site context, but very easy to do. Back here. Okay, so this CoBUG site in Montgomery, West Virginia, we've got another multifamily housing in, I'll call it rural West Virginia. It's Montgomery is a small, fairly small town, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 residents. It's got a downtown, but there's not a lot there. But it's obviously surrounded in the middle of these mountain valley. And coming from OpenStreetMaps, you can see there's very little information here. I think there's 2 buildings that are in there from default. But again, if I go to the data sources and then this ArcGIS, instead of typing Ohio, I can type in West Virginia or California. So West Virginia buildings. And again, this Microsoft Buildings project comes up, same information as before. I am adding buildings, so I would add that to my design project. And that brings it in. I can right click and hit vector configure. And again, under the source, I can drape it. I can change the style. I'll leave it as is. InfoWorks started out as a European company, so it has a very European feel to it. I'm not going to change any of the roof heights, but this is sort of the out-of-the-box stuff that you get. All I've done is kind of draped it, and now I have all the buildings, and they look kind of identical, like a German village here if you're local to Columbus. But very, very easy to do. Just a few clicks, and I have a modeled site with roads and terrain and imagery and all that. So now I can add my Revit building in there and check it. You can also create coverages. So let's say I want to create a coverage. You have the options here to create a terrain hole. So if you had a CAD layout with your property lines, you can sketch things and say it's this site, and I'm just going to trace around the roads here. And once it's complete, once it's complete, it will carve a hole there. Do this again. So click, follow the periphery and hit enter. It's not cooperating. Double click at end, and now it has kind of punched a hole in there. So something else to keep in mind is that OpenStreetMap data is generally not super accurate. They're pretty big coverage areas, like 30-meter resolution. And so if you spent time, creating a topo surface model of your site that your civil engineer provides, there often can be some slight differences between what this is generating from photogrammetry and LiDAR scans, essentially, between your building and what's available on site. So by creating these holes essentially to correspond with the property line, you're not getting overlaps between the terrain that's part of this and the terrain that's part of your contour topo surface. Going back to Revit here, for our project, you have the ability to go to the massing and site tool and create a topo surface from this. And so it's, you can select that as an import, and it will create a topo surface that you can, so it's kind of a combination of the generic topo surface from InfoWorks with Format as the middleman. You're not really editing anything in there. And your very detailed site contour or site topo surface in Revit that you have the ability to modify the points for and adjust things up or down. So you can kind of warp your site model down to meet the InfoWorks model. So with this being a large site, you obviously end up with a lot of points. So I will cancel that, but you have the ability. So I would look at a smaller section essentially and just do my topo surface there and not the whole thing. And then the InfoWorks version of it would have the hole in there, and that's where you warp it to meet. So there's already one here. I could take these and edit the surface and get the points there, and I could warp these down by adjusting it however I needed to do that. So obviously nothing really was planned with the Buckeye Lake site here and this model from the sample file in Revit. But that's how you would do that, is you would move these points and adjust them down to match the local terrain of your site. So the other thing that I wanted to show, and see, we've got about 15 minutes left or so. We've got a project that we're doing, and this one is a little bit more. So I redid the site because I just learned the draping trick immediately after bringing in the stuff from ArcGIS. And so I didn't, and then when I was typing in the rotation, I accidentally forgot the minus sign. So it's slightly skewed, but this is a multifamily project that we're doing that has started to incorporate some of this. So you can see the buildings in the background. Spent some time populating the model with the Enscape entourage for the plantings. You can see the buildings beyond, and again, I got the angle wrong here for the slight change, but start to show you the possibilities of getting something, the site context, and you can change the time of day here, and you'll see the light come up. So that's just a quick little video I did before this, just to kind of demonstrate how it's all starting to come together. The advantage of 2013 that they've added is that you can now link in format projects, and I believe in format you can link in InfoWorks projects. So it's a little bit easier. Instead of having to start from scratch and move it around and replace it, it would remember your efforts to move things around and place them accurately. So if I went back and updated it, I would just have to reload the link and inform it, and then reload the link in Revit, and it would show you those changes without having to re-import and then readjust the positions again. So it's kind of an exciting thing. I've got a lot more that I want to learn about tools in InfraWorks to help develop things even more. You can modify the styles of roads, make them component roads. You can add things like barriers and guardrails and streetlights and fire hydrants, you know, and have them spaced regularly. So it seems like a pretty good way of really filling out that. Additionally, with the topo surfaces, there are Dynamo scripts and other programs that allow you to basically take slabs like floors and drape them to topo surfaces. And then once they're slabs, you can then have a lot more freedom in adding, you know, like foundation profiles or curb profiles to those, and really get a heightened sense of realism, relatively easy. Floors are much easier to control the edges of than site regions, subregions. Because you can't have boundaries overlap, and in a lot of cases, Revit won't snap to lines that are in regions. So using this to create the topo surface, and then using floor slabs to behave as sidewalks and driveways and parking lots and things, and then instead of using the out-of-the-box parking tools, I like to use railings for parking stripes and parking blocks. It actually will follow the terrain better than kind of floating above them and being perfectly flat. So I'm not going to go into detail on those. There's lots of great tutorials, particularly from Jeff Pinero, the Revit Kid, and his BIM After Dark YouTube channel. He's got all kinds of great tips on site work and tools like auto snap, essentially like auto click for tracing contour lines and getting something a little bit more accurate. The other thing that's really nice in 2023 Revit is the fact that your site boundaries now can actually follow and have both concave or convex edges, essentially. It used to be the case where if your site had a concave site or concave edge, it would kind of span across those and give you extra surface that you didn't want. In the new version of 23, it actually will follow those boundaries better and lead to less overlap, and a lot more control on how that works. That's pretty much what I wanted to show. I think we did pretty good on time. Did anybody have any questions? I think this is helpful. And if you wanted to stay muted, you could type it in the chat box. Okay, well, if nobody has any comments, it's really all that I wanted to share. Once again, this is being recorded. It will be posted to all the attendees that had signed up for it. It will also be posted on our social media pages. On behalf of CoBUG, I'd like to thank everybody for attending. I'd like to thank everybody for helping to spread the word. So it's It's great to see participation. It's great to share knowledge. So if anybody has any ideas or requests, we're certainly happy to get your feedback with anything, and try to provide answers that people need or tips that we've come across. We're not wanting to keep all the information to ourselves. We like to share it with people and make us all better. So hopefully you found this helpful. You know, again, thank you for attending. Hope you enjoy the rest of your week. So